The nursery smelled of fresh paint and lavender-scented linen. Sunlight streamed through the large window, illuminating dust motes dancing over a pristine white crib. It was a room of quiet anticipation, a perfect picture of a life about to begin. But the silence was wrong. It was heavy, suffocating. On the meticulously made bed in the master suite, a single sheet of cream-colored stationery lay stark against the grey duvet. 4 lines of elegant, looping script. A gut punch in calligraphy. James Peters read it once, then twice. His pregnant wife was gone, and the note she left behind was a perfectly crafted lie. James Peters's Atherton, California mansion was less a home and more a monument to calculated success. All glass, steel, and unsettling quiet, it overlooked Silicon Valley like a predator watching its territory. He stood in the cavernous living room, the note from his wife, Katrina, trembling slightly in his hand. "My dearest James, I can't do this anymore. The life we've built feels like a cage. I need to find myself again, away from all of this. Please don't look for me." Katrina. To the outside world, it was a tragedy. A sensitive, heavily pregnant woman, overwhelmed by the pressures of a high-profile life. James knew better. This wasn't a cry for help. It was a declaration of war. He dialed 911, his voice a practiced symphony of panic and grief. "My wife. She's pregnant. 8 months pregnant. She's gone." She left a note. Within the hour, the sterile quiet of his home was replaced by the measured footsteps and clipped radio chatter of the Atherton Police Department. Leading the initial inquiry was Detective Bobby Welch, a man whose weary eyes and rumpled suit seemed out of place amidst James's curated perfection. Welch had been a cop long enough to know that grief had a texture, a chaotic, messy signature. James's grief was smooth, polished, like a product ready for market. "Mr. Peters, can you think of any reason why your wife would leave?" Bobby asked, his gaze drifting from James's $1,000 shoes to the cold, abstract art on the walls. "We've been under a lot of stress," James said, pinching the bridge of his nose. He looked every bit the tormented husband. "My company, Aura, is going through a massive expansion. Katrina, she's a private person. The media attention, the galas, it was all becoming too much for her. Was she seeing a doctor for anxiety, depression? She saw her OB-GYN, of course. She was healthy. Happy, I thought." James gestured vaguely around the room. "We had everything. This baby was everything to us." Bobby nodded slowly, his eyes lingering on the nursery he'd just walked through. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. It looked like a catalogue, not a room waiting for a baby. "Did you argue last night?" A flicker of something, annoyance maybe, crossed James's face before being smoothed over. "No, we had dinner. We talked about names." She seemed tired. She went to bed early. A lie. Bobby could feel it in the air, as crisp and artificial as the climate-controlled atmosphere. He'd spent 20 years reading people, and James Peters was a locked book written in a language of deception. As the forensics team dusted for prints, a formality, as there was no sign of foul play, Bobby walked through the couple's walk-in closet. On one side, rows of James's bespoke Italian suits. On the other, Katrina's clothes, elegant, understated dresses, soft cashmere sweaters. A small, locked jewelry box sat on her vanity. "Mr. Peters, do you have the key for this?" Bobby asked, holding it up. James came to the doorway, his jaw tight. "No, that was hers. Private." Later, after James's lawyer arrived and began hovering protectively, Bobby sat in his unmarked sedan at the base of the long, winding driveway. He pulled out his phone and typed James Peters into the search bar. The first dozen results were about Aura. his revolutionary AI-driven logistics company that had made him a billionaire before 35. Then he added another name, a name he'd overheard one of the younger officers whispering about. Rebecca Hancock. The results were immediate. Tabloid photos from 6 weeks ago. James Peters looking comfortable and intimate, leaving a private Beverly Hills club with Rebecca Hancock, a stunning actress whose career was just beginning to ignite. Her hand was on his arm, her head tilted toward his in a gesture of easy familiarity. The headline read, "Tech Titan's New Muse." Bobby looked back up at the glass house on the hill. A cage, Katrina had called it in her note. He was beginning to understand why. It wasn't the life she was running from. It was the man who had built it. He started his car, a grim certainty settling in his stomach. The search for Katrina Hatfield had just begun, but the investigation into James Peters was already underway. The story exploded. Pregnant wife of Silicon Valley, mogul vanishes. News vans camped outside the gates of the Atherton estate like vultures. Katrina's beautiful, smiling face was splashed across every screen, a stark contrast to the grainy paparazzi shot of her husband that always seemed to run alongside it. James, guided by a team of public relations experts, played his part to perfection. He held a press conference on the steps of his home, his eyes red-rimmed and his voice cracking with emotion. "I only want one thing," he said, his gaze finding a camera in the throng. "For my wife, my beautiful Katrina, to come home safely. Kat, if you can hear me, I love you. Our baby needs you. Please, just let us know you're okay." It was a masterful performance. He was vulnerable, powerful, heartbroken. The public narrative swelled with sympathy for the tragic billionaire. But behind the scenes, the tide was already turning. The photos of James with Rebecca Hancock resurfaced, no longer a buried tabloid whisper, but a cannon blast through his carefully constructed image. The media, smelling blood in the water, began digging. Rebecca's agent issued a terse, "No comment." Rebecca herself went dark, her vibrant social media accounts falling silent. The court of public opinion was now fiercely divided. Was he a grieving husband or a philandering monster whose pregnant wife had finally had enough? Detective Bobby Welch cared about a different court. He sat in his cluttered office, the walls covered in case notes and crime scene photos, a stark contrast to James's minimalist mansion. On the board in front of him, he had 2 photos, Katrina Hatfield beaming at a charity event, and James Peters, his face a mask of public anguish. "He's hiding something," Bobby muttered to his partner, a young, tech-savvy detective named Maria Flores. "The affair seems obvious," Maria said, scrolling through financial records on her tablet. "But his finances are weird, Bobby. Aura's stock is soaring, but there are massive personal cash withdrawals over the last 3 months. We're talking millions, untraceable wire transfers to offshore accounts. Running money," Bobby said, his eyes narrowing. "Is he paying someone off, or building a nest egg to run his own disappearing act? Could be for the girlfriend. Rebecca Hancock's new movie just got a mysterious influx of funding from an anonymous backer. Her career went from B-list to lead role overnight." Bobby leaned back, the old chair groaning in protest. "So he's buying her a career while his pregnant wife sits at home. It's a motive for Katrina to leave, sure. But the note, it's too clean, too simple." He thought of the jewelry box. "Get a warrant for that box, and let's pay Mr. Peters another visit, this time without his lawyer present if we can manage it." Meanwhile, James sat in his home office, the news playing on a silent, wall-mounted screen. His PR chief, a sharp-suited man named Julian, was pacing. "The Rebecca photos are killing us, James. You have to get ahead of it." "It was a mistake," James said, his voice flat and cold, all trace of public grief gone. A meaningless diversion. "It doesn't look meaningless. It looks like you were flaunting your mistress while your wife was preparing for your child." James's fist clenched. Katrina knew our marriage wasn't a fairy tale. It was a partnership, an arrangement that benefited us both. She was emotional, hormonal. She overreacted. He was spinning a narrative even to his own team. He was testing it out, refining the words he would use to paint Katrina as unstable, unreliable. He was laying the groundwork not just to explain her absence, but to discredit her entirely. Because he knew, with chilling certainty, that the real secret Katrina held had nothing to do with another woman. It was a secret that could destroy his entire empire, a truth buried at the very foundation of Aura. The note wasn't a suicide pact or a lover's lament. It was the opening move in a game he never thought she'd have the courage to play. Bobby Welch found James Peters not in his sterile mansion, but at the gleaming headquarters of Aura in Palo Alto. The building was an architectural marvel of glass and recycled wood, with an indoor waterfall and employees gliding on hoverboards. It felt less like a company and more like a cult of innovation. Bobby, in his rumpled suit, was an immediate anomaly. He was led to James's office, a corner suite with panoramic views that made the world below look like a toy set. James was on a call, his back to the door. He held up a finger, a gesture of dismissal that set Bobby's teeth on edge. After a deliberately long minute, James ended the call and swiveled in his ergonomic chair. "Detective, I was told you were at my home. Thought I'd try your office," Bobby said, remaining standing. He placed a folder on the vast marble desk and slid a photograph out of it. It was the clearest shot of James and Rebecca Hancock laughing together outside the club. "Your wife has been missing for 72 hours. During that time, have you had any contact with Miss Hancock?" James glanced at the photo as if it were a mildly interesting piece of junk mail. "No. As I'm sure you're aware, my focus has been entirely on finding Katrina." "Right. Your tearful press conference was very convincing," Bobby said, his voice dry. "But you see, it looks bad, James. It paints a picture. Man builds empire, gets wife, gets bored, finds new, younger model. Pregnant wife becomes an inconvenience." The calm on James's face fractured. A muscle in his jaw jumped. "You have no idea what you're talking about. My marriage is none of your business. My only concern is Katrina." "Is it?" Bobby leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk. The power dynamic shifted. "Because my concern is that her note mentioned a cage, and this life you built, it looks a lot like one. You control everything, don't you? The company, the narrative, the people. Did you try to control her? Katrina was a free woman. She could do whatever she wanted. Could she? Or was she a part of the corporate image? The supportive, beautiful wife who humanized the ruthless tech genius?" Bobby pushed another file across the desk. "These are the cash withdrawals Maria Flores found. $3 million in the last 2 months. That's a lot of walking around money, James. Was it for Rebecca? A down payment on her silence? Or was it for something else?" James stood up, his height giving him a physical advantage he was used to leveraging. "This is harassment. My lawyers will have your badge for this, detective. You are out of your depth." "Maybe," Bobby conceded, "but I'm a patient man, and things have a way of surfacing." He tapped the photograph of Rebecca. "People talk, especially when they realize they're just a pawn in someone else's game. You should know, your wife's jewelry box, the one you didn't have a key for. We got a warrant. The locksmith opened it in about 30 seconds. James's face went utterly blank. For the first time, genuine fear flickered in his eyes. "It was empty," Bobby continued, watching him closely, "except for a single small item, a key, not for a door. It looks like a key to a safe deposit box. James's composure shattered. He strode to the door and yanked it open. "Get out! Get out of my office now, or I will have you removed for trespassing." Security guards appeared instantly, large men in sharp suits. Bobby gave a slow, deliberate nod. He had hit a nerve, a big one. The key was the one thing James hadn't anticipated. As Bobby was escorted out, walking past the Zen gardens and kombucha fountains, he knew he was closer than ever. Katrina Hatfield hadn't just run away. She had left a trail. And James Peters wasn't just a cheating husband afraid of a scandal. He was a man terrified of a secret important enough to move millions of dollars for, a secret that was likely hidden in a bank vault, waiting. The rain fell in a relentless, silvery sheet against the window of a small, secluded cabin nestled in the dense forests of Oregon's coast. Inside, a fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting a warm glow on Katrina Hatfield. She was not the fragile, broken woman from the news reports. She was calm, focused, and very much in control. Her belly was a prominent, perfect sphere under her wool sweater. She rested a protective hand on it, feeling the gentle kick of her unborn child. This was for you, she thought. All of this. Her escape had been meticulous, planned for over 6 months. She'd used burner phones, cash, and the help of one trusted friend from college who believed in her without question. She had created a new identity, a quiet life in a town where no one knew her face. The TV in the corner was on, the volume low. She watched James's press conference, a bitter smile touching her lips. He was good, so convincing in his grief. He had always been a brilliant performer. Her mind drifted back to the beginning. She'd met James when he was just a driven, brilliant coder with a dream. She'd been there beside him, not just as a partner, but as his first believer. She'd been there when he partnered with his best friend, a gentle genius named Mark. Together, James and Mark were going to change the world with their creation, the algorithm that would become the heart of Aura. But then Mark died. A sudden, tragic hiking accident. James had been devastated, or so he had claimed. He had inherited their shared intellectual property, and, within a year, launched Aura on his own. He became a legend, and Katrina became the billionaire's wife. The lie had been a slow-growing cancer in their marriage. At first, she'd buried her doubts, believing James's story. But small things began to surface. An old email from Mark, expressing fear that James was pushing him out. A stray comment from a former colleague. Then, 6 months ago, while searching for an old photo album in the attic, she had found it. Mark's old laptop, which James had claimed was lost. Charging it up had felt like opening a tomb. On it, she found everything. The original, uncorrupted source code for Aura, time-stamped and credited solely to Mark. She found frantic emails from Mark to his lawyer, documenting James's attempts to steal his work, and the final, chilling entry in his digital journal, dated the day before he died. Confronting James tomorrow at the trailhead, he has to make this right. The realization had crashed down on her. James hadn't just stolen a company. He had, at the very least, created the circumstances for his partner's death and covered it up. The man she loved was a phantom. The house, the money, the life. It was all built on a grave. When she found out she was pregnant, everything crystallized. She could not bring a child into that house of lies. Divorcing him wouldn't be enough. He would crush her, use his power to paint her as unstable, take her child from her. He would bury the truth forever. So she planned. She emptied their joint accounts of her own inheritance money, slowly, carefully. She secured the contents of the jewelry box. Not jewels, but the hard drive from Mark's laptop and the key to a safe deposit box where she had stored notarized copies and a full confession of what she knew. The note she left for James was a masterpiece of misdirection, designed to make him think she'd had an emotional breakdown over his affair with Rebecca Hancock, an affair she'd known about for months and saw only as a symptom of his deeper rot. She picked up a burner phone. It was time for the next move. She dialed the number of a renowned investigative journalist at the Wall Street Journal, a woman famous for taking down corporate giants. "My name is not important," Katrina said, her voice steady and clear. "But I have information about the foundational technology of Aura. I have proof that James Peters did not create it. He stole it, and I think you'll want to see what I have." She hung up before they could trace the call. The first stone had been thrown. The tidal wave was coming. The Wall Street Journal article landed like a precision-guided bomb. It wasn't a speculative piece filled with anonymous sources. It was a surgical takedown. The front page screamed, "Aura's origins questioned. Sources provide evidence tech mogul. James Peters built empire on stolen code." The article laid out a damning, albeit still partial, timeline. It detailed the core algorithm of Aura and presented technical analyses suggesting it was identical to a project developed by Peters's late partner, Mark. It didn't name Katrina, referring only to a source close to the company's origins. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. By the time the stock market opened, Aura's stock was in freefall. It plummeted 40% in the first hour of trading. Billions of dollars in market value evaporated into thin air. James's carefully crafted world, already stressed by the scandal of his missing wife, was now imploding. He stood in his office, staring at the blood-red ticker on his screen, his face a mask of cold fury. This wasn't happening. He had been so sure the problem was the affair, the emotional fallout of a broken marriage. He had prepared for that, planned to spin Katrina as a scorned, unstable woman. But this was an attack on the very core of his identity, his legacy. She had outmaneuvered him completely. The note, the disappearance. It was all a brilliant feint. She hadn't broken down, she had set a trap. "Julian!" he roared, and his PR chief scurried into the office, his face pale. "We're drafting a statement," Julian stammered. "Deny everything. Slanderous lies, corporate espionage from a competitor. Find her!" James slammed his fist on the marble desk, the sound echoing in the silent room. "This has her fingerprints all over it. She's the only one who could have known. Find her!" His paranoia, once a low hum, was now a screaming siren. He saw enemies everywhere. He trusted no one. His first call was to Rebecca Hancock. She answered on the second ring, her voice a nervous flutter. "James? I saw the news. It's horrible. Did you talk to anyone?" he demanded, his voice devoid of any warmth. "What? No. Of course not. I've been hiding from the paparazzi just like you told me to. Don't lie to me, Rebecca. That Detective Welch. Did he contact you? Did you say anything?" "He left a card with my doorman, but I didn't call him back," she said, her voice rising in panic. "James, you're scaring me." "You should be scared," he snarled. "Your career, that little movie I financed for you, it can all disappear. I made you. I can unmake you. Stay quiet. Don't talk to anyone. Do you understand me?" He hung up, leaving her in stunned silence. The mask was off. The charming, powerful benefactor was gone, replaced by a cold, threatening tyrant. Rebecca stood in her sterile, rented Hollywood condo, a gilded cage of her own, and felt a profound chill. She had aligned herself with James for the power, for the boost to her career. She had rationalized the affair, telling herself it was just a game powerful people played, but this was different. The threat in his voice was real. She looked at the news, at the crumbling empire, at the face of the missing, pregnant Katrina Hatfield. For the first time, she didn't see a rival. She saw a victim, or worse, a woman who had been pushed so far she had to burn down the world to escape. Rebecca thought about the nights she'd spent at James's house, the way he would sometimes talk in his sleep, muttering the name Mark. She remembered seeing him once, late at night in his office, staring at a framed photo of himself and another man, his face contorted with something she couldn't decipher then, but now recognized as a toxic mix of guilt and rage. She walked over to her purse and pulled out the crumpled business card Detective Welch had left. His number was printed in stark black ink. She had a choice to make. Go down with James's sinking ship or grab the only life raft in sight. Her hand trembled as she unlocked her phone. Detective Bobby Welch was nursing a lukewarm coffee at his desk when his phone buzzed. Private number. He almost ignored it, but a hunch made him answer. Welch. Is this Detective Welch? The voice was hesitant, strained. The one investigating the disappearance of Katrina Hatfield? It is. Who's this? A pause. My name is Rebecca Hancock. Bobby sat bolt upright. This was the break he'd been waiting for. Miss Hancock, I'm glad you called. I'd very much like to talk to you. Not on the phone, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Can we meet? Somewhere private. I think I'm in trouble. They met an hour later at a nondescript diner in Daly City, halfway between her world and his. She was huddled in a corner booth, wearing a baseball cap and dark sunglasses, looking less like a glamorous actress and more like a hunted animal. He threatened me, she began, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she wasn't drinking. James, after the article came out, he called and said he could unmake me. He sounded unhinged. What are you afraid of, Rebecca? Bobby asked gently. I don't know, but it's more than just his company failing. There's something darker. He was obsessed with his late partner, Mark. He talked about him sometimes. He'd say things like, Mark didn't have the stomach for what it takes to win. He said Mark was weak. Bobby leaned in. Did you ever see anything? Hear anything specific? Rebecca's eyes welled with tears. I thought it was just business. I didn't want to know the details. But one night, I was at his house. He was in a meeting, and I was waiting in his office. I saw documents on his screen. Legal papers. It was a settlement with Mark's widow, a ridiculously small amount, signed just after his death, and there was another file open next to it. It looked like a geology report. It mentioned unstable shale and rock slide risk at the exact location where Mark had his accident. Bobby felt a jolt. This was it, the missing piece. It elevated the case from corporate theft to potential homicide. He saw me looking, Rebecca continued, her voice trembling. He didn't say anything, just closed the laptop. But the way he looked at me, it was cold. Like I was an object, a liability. I think Katrina must have seen that look 1,000 times. I think that's why she ran. We need proof, Rebecca. Can you testify to this? She looked down at her hands. Her career was likely over either way. She could be the homewrecker mistress who stood by a monster, or she could be the woman who helped bring him down. It wasn't a difficult choice. Yes, she said, her voice firming with resolve. But I want protection. I want immunity for any potential complicity. I was a fool, detective, but I'm not a criminal. I can talk to the DA, Bobby promised. You're doing the right thing. As Rebecca recounted every detail she could remember, Bobby's phone buzzed again. It was a text from an encrypted number, forwarded through a lawyer he'd been in touch with, Katrina's lawyer. The message was simple. Safe deposit box, First National Bank of Palo Alto, box 703. The key is in evidence. The original hard drive is inside. Use it to give Mark's widow the justice she deserves. Checkmate. Katrina had provided the weapon. Rebecca had just provided the motive and the means to connect it directly to James. The empire wasn't just crumbling anymore. Bobby Welch was about to level it. He looked at Rebecca Hancock, a woman he had initially dismissed as a shallow opportunist. He saw now that she, too, was a survivor of James Peters. They were an unlikely alliance, two women from opposite ends of James's life, coming together to ensure his downfall. The federal warrant was executed with quiet, brutal efficiency. At 9 a.m., a fleet of black SUVs descended on the Aura campus. FBI agents, their jackets emblazoned with bold yellow letters, swarmed the glass and steel building. Employees froze at their desks, their kombuchas and ergonomic chairs forgotten as the reality of the raid set in. James Peters was in his glass-walled office, on a frantic conference call with his board of directors, trying to stop the financial bleeding. He was promising a counter-offensive, a lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal, a narrative of corporate sabotage. He was still performing, still trying to control the story. He didn't see them coming until the door to his office swung open. It wasn't his assistant. It was two FBI agents, their faces grim and impassive. And behind them, standing in the doorway, was Detective Bobby Welch. The call with the board went silent. James slowly lowered the phone to its cradle. He looked at the agents, then his eyes locked on Bobby's. In that instant, all the bravado, all the arrogance, drained away. He saw no triumph in Bobby's face, only a quiet, weary finality. He understood. He had been completely and utterly beaten. "James Peters," one of the agents said, his voice echoing in the suddenly cavernous office, "you are under arrest for wire fraud, securities fraud, and conspiracy to obstruct justice in connection with the death of Mark Sallow." The click of the handcuffs was a small, sharp sound in the cathedral of his ambition. As they led him out, he was forced to perform a perp walk through the open-plan office, past the faces of the hundreds of employees whose careers he had just destroyed. Their expressions were a mixture of shock, confusion, and betrayal. The cult of innovation had lost its leader. The evidence was overwhelming. The original hard drive from Mark's laptop, recovered from Katrina's safe deposit box, was the smoking gun for the intellectual property theft. Rebecca Hancock's testimony provided the crucial link to the cover-up of Mark's death, corroborated by the geology reports and financial settlements the FBI unearthed in their deep dive. They even found the expert James had paid to author the misleading report on the unstable shale, who quickly folded under pressure. James's lawyers tried to fight, to delay, to spin. They attempted to paint Katrina as a vindictive spouse and Rebecca as a scorned lover, two women colluding to destroy a great man. But the evidence was too clean, too digital, too absolute. In the interrogation room, under the harsh fluorescent lights, James finally broke. But it wasn't a confession born of remorse. It was a tirade of narcissistic rage. "She was nothing without me," he hissed, his face blotchy and red. "I gave her everything. That house, that life, it was all mine. And Mark, he didn't have the vision. He would have sat on that code for a decade, perfecting it. I took it and I built an empire. I did what he was too weak to do." Bobby Welch watched from behind the one-way glass, a sense of profound sadness washing over him. James felt no guilt, only the fury of being caught. He wasn't sorry for what he did, only that he had lost. He saw people not as human beings, but as assets or liabilities. Mark was a liability. Rebecca was an asset, then a liability. And Katrina was the asset who had learned how to fight back, who had liquidated his entire kingdom to save herself and her child. The glass cage was shattered, and its king was finally being brought to account. 9 months later, the Oregon autumn was a riot of gold and crimson. In a modest but comfortable house overlooking a quiet river, Katrina Hatfield rocked her 3-month-old daughter, Lily. The morning light streamed into the cozy living room, illuminating the happy clutter of a new baby. The news of James's trial had been a distant rumble of thunder. He had been found guilty on all counts and was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Aora had been dismantled, its assets sold off to competitors. His name, once a synonym for genius, was now a cautionary tale of hubris and greed. Katrina had followed the proceedings through her lawyer, but she hadn't attended. Her focus was here, in this new life she had built from the ashes of the old one. She had her baby, her freedom, and her peace. There was a gentle knock on the door. Katrina opened it to find a woman in her late 50s, with kind, tired eyes and silver-streaked hair. It was Sarah Sallow, Mark's widow. They had spoken on the phone, but had never met in person. "Katrina," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "Sarah, please come in." They sat together on the sofa, Lily cooing softly in her bassinet nearby. Sarah held a large envelope in her hands. "This came yesterday," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "The first payment from the civil suit. Because of the evidence you saved. The lawyers said it's one of the largest intellectual property settlements in history. My husband, his name has been cleared. Everyone knows what he created, what was stolen from him." Tears streamed down her face. "For years I believed it was an accident. I grieved the man, but I never knew I also had to grieve his life's work. You gave that back to me, to my children. There are no words to thank you." Katrina took her hand. "I only did what was right. I couldn't let my child be raised on that money, in that house. It was all poison." "You are so strong," Sarah whispered, looking from Katrina to the sleeping baby. "To do all that while pregnant, to risk everything." "I learned that strength is quiet," Katrina replied, a soft smile on her face. "It's not about building empires. It's about protecting what truly matters." After Sarah left, Katrina stood on her porch, breathing in the crisp, clean air. She wasn't a billionaire's wife anymore. She was just a mother in a small house with a future that was entirely her own. She had faced betrayal and psychological warfare from the man she once loved. She had navigated a world of immense power imbalance and emerged not just intact, but victorious. Rebecca Hancock had found her own form of redemption. She gave a series of candid interviews, not to glamorize her story, but to speak about ambition, manipulation, and moral compromise. She went back to acting in small, independent films, choosing art over fame, and slowly rebuilding her career on her own terms. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the river, Katrina held Lily close. Her daughter represented a new beginning, a life free from the dark legacy of James Peters. This was her empire now, a legacy of truth, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. She had not only escaped the cage, she had found that she had the strength to build her own world, a world filled with light. In the end, it wasn't about revenge, it was about restoration. Katrina didn't just expose a lie, she restored a stolen legacy, secured her child's future, and reclaimed her own soul from the gilded cage she'd been trapped in. She proved that true power isn't measured in billions of dollars or towering skyscrapers, but in the courage to speak the truth and the resilience to build a new life founded on dignity and love. Her story is a powerful reminder that even in the face of overwhelming betrayal, the human spirit can find its way back to the light, stronger and wiser than before. If this story of strength and redemption resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with others who might find inspiration in Katrina's journey. Don't forget to subscribe for more emotional stories about real-life complexities and the power of second chances. The sound that broke her world wasn't a scream or a crash. It was laughter. A woman's laughter, light and melodic, echoing from the master bedroom she and Rodney had designed together. Dorothy Brown, 7 months pregnant and carrying a bag of organic groceries, stood frozen in the marble foyer of her own home. The scent of an unfamiliar, expensive perfume, something sharp and floral, not her subtle vanilla, clung to the air. Then she saw them. A pair of impossibly high, blood-red stilettos kicked carelessly onto the Persian rug. They weren't hers. And in that silent, suffocating moment, Dorothy knew her life was a lie. The western Massachusetts air was thick with the late August humidity, promising a thunderstorm that had yet to break. Dorothy felt a similar pressure building inside her chest as she pushed the heavy oak door shut behind her. The click of the lock sounded like a gunshot in the cavernous silence, a silence immediately betrayed by another ripple of that musical laughter from upstairs. Her hands, slick with sweat, tightened on the paper grocery bags. Kale, quinoa, prenatal vitamins, the mundane ingredients for a life she thought was real. She set the bags down on the polished granite island in the kitchen, her movements slow, deliberate, as if she were a visitor in a museum of her own life. Everything was pristine. The stainless steel Sub-Zero refrigerator, the gleaming Wolf range, the custom cabinetry that cost more than her parents' first house. Rodney Searles demanded perfection, and Dorothy had, for 10 years, been the perfect curator of his perfect world. Her bare feet made no sound on the cool travertine floors as she moved towards the grand, curving staircase. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the soft, steady rhythm of the baby kicking inside her. Breathe, Dorothy. Just breathe. But the air was too thin, stolen by the woman upstairs. Halfway up the stairs, she heard his voice, low and laced with an amusement she hadn't heard directed at her in years. Easy, Tanya. We have time. She's at her yoga class. Tanya. The name was a shard of glass in her throat. Tanya Dykes, the new VP of marketing at Rodney's private equity firm. Dorothy had met her once at a company gala. She was young, sharp, with a predatory smile and a designer dress that seemed poured onto her body. Dorothy had felt matronly and invisible beside her then, and now she understood why. She reached the top of the stairs, her hand tracing the cool, smooth wood of the banister. The door to their bedroom was ajar. Pushing it open felt like pushing open the door to a tomb, and there they were. Rodney, her husband of a decade, the man whose child she carried, was standing in only his suit trousers, his back to her. Before him, perched on the edge of their bed, was Tanya Dykes, clad in a black silk robe that Dorothy recognized as her own. The red stilettos in the foyer now made a horrifying kind of sense. Tanya was laughing, tilting her head back as Rodney leaned in to kiss her neck. The world went silent. The blood rushing in Dorothy's ears drowned out every sound except the frantic thumping of her own heart. Rodney. Her voice was a rasp, a dry leaf skittering across pavement. It was barely a whisper, but it cut through the moment like a surgeon's scalpel. He froze. His head snapped up, and he turned slowly, his eyes widening in a fleeting expression of panic before settling into a familiar mask of annoyance. It was the same look he gave her when she overcooked his steak, or when a stock he'd invested in dipped by 1/4 of a point. "Dorothy," he said, his voice level, controlled. "What are you doing home so early?" Tanya Dykes slid off the bed, clutching the silk robe tighter around herself. Her face, a mask of expertly applied makeup, showed a flicker of triumph. She wasn't ashamed. She was victorious. "My class was cancelled," Dorothy said, her gaze locked on Rodney. She could feel the baby shifting, a turmoil of limbs mirroring her own inner chaos. "Obviously, I should have called first. I seemed to be interrupting." Rodney ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed dark hair. He took a step towards her, away from Tanya, a subconscious act of distancing. "Look, Dory, let's not be dramatic. It's not what it looks like." The lie was so blatant, so insulting, it almost made her laugh. "Not what it looks like," she repeated, her voice trembling. She gestured with a shaking hand towards Tanya, who was now watching them with a detached curiosity, like a scientist observing rats in a maze. "Then what is it, Rodney? What exactly am I looking at?" "It was a mistake," he said, his tone shifting from annoyance to placating. It was his deal-closing voice, the one he used to charm investors and crush opponents. "Tanya was just... We had a stressful week. It meant nothing." "It meant enough for her to be wearing my robe in our bed," Dorothy shot back, a surge of adrenaline cutting through the shock. Tanya finally spoke, her voice smooth as polished stone. "Maybe you should go, Dorothy. Give him some space to think." The sheer audacity of it stole Dorothy's breath. To be told to leave her own home by the woman sleeping with her husband. Dorothy's gaze swung to her. "You will not speak to me. You will get your things, and you will get out of my house." Rodney stepped in between them. "Enough. Dorothy, calm down. You're pregnant. You can't get this worked up." He was using their baby as a shield, a tool to manage her. "Don't you dare," she whispered, the words raw with pain. "Don't you dare use our child to excuse this, to excuse her." "It's a fling, Dorothy. It happens," he finally exploded, his frustration boiling over. The charming facade cracked, revealing the ugly entitlement beneath. "My God, you act like this is the end of the world. We'll get past it. People do." He didn't understand. He thought this was a line item on a balance sheet, a temporary dip that could be corrected. He couldn't see that he had just taken a sledgehammer to the very foundation of her life. The house, the marriage, the future she was carrying inside her. It was all a house of glass, and he had just shattered every last pane. "No," she said, her voice suddenly clear and calm, the eye of her own personal hurricane. "We won't be getting past this." She turned, not looking at either of them again. She walked down the stairs, each step a measured, agonizing movement. She picked up her car keys from the bowl by the door, her hand not even shaking anymore. She was numb, a ghost in her own home. "Dorothy, where are you going?" Rodney called from the top of the stairs. "Don't be ridiculous. We need to talk about this." She paused with her hand on the doorknob. She could hear the first fat drops of rain beginning to spatter against the windows. The promised storm had finally arrived. Without turning around, she said, "There's nothing left to talk about." She walked out the door and into the rain, leaving the keys to the Mercedes on the porch. She didn't look back. She didn't have a destination. She just knew she could never, ever come back. The life she had known was over. The rain fell in blinding sheets, blurring the manicured lawns and stone facades of Weston into a watercolor wash of greens and greys. Dorothy drove, her hands gripping the wheel of her modest Honda CR-V, the car Rodney called her errand mobile, with a white-knuckled intensity. She had no destination, only a direction. Away. Each mile put between her and the glass house was a small, defiant breath of air in her suffocating new reality. For the first hour, she was on autopilot, her mind a maelstrom of shock and betrayal. The image of Tanya in her robe, of Rodney's annoyed expression, played on a torturous loop. Tears streamed down her face, mingling with the rain on the window she'd cracked open, needing to feel something real. But as the initial wave of grief subsided, it was replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. Dorothy had spent 10 years subsumed by Rodney's life. She'd given up her promising career in art curation to become Mrs. Searles, a role that involved managing 3 properties, organizing charity galas, and ensuring Rodney's life ran with frictionless perfection. She had become an accessory, and like any outdated accessory, she had just been replaced. The power imbalance in their relationship had always been there, a silent undercurrent. It was his name, his money, his world. She had simply been allowed to live in it. Now, cast out, she felt a terrifying, dizzying sense of freedom. He thought she was just a dramatic, hormonal pregnant woman who would drive around the block, cry it out, and come home, ready to talk. He was wrong. Her mind, once occupied with guest lists and dinner menus, began to work with a long, dormant, strategic precision. She pulled into a rest stop on the Mass Pike, the car engine ticking in the sudden quiet. She took out her iPhone, Rodney's face smiling back at her from the lock screen. A photo from Italy last summer. A lie. With a trembling finger, she powered it down. Then, she opened the glove compartment and removed a small, cheap burner phone she'd bought months ago. It wasn't that she had expected this exact scenario, but she had seen the small signs of Rodney's growing detachment, his late nights, at the office, the scent of that same perfume on his suit jacket weeks ago, which he'd dismissed as someone from work. A quiet, nagging instinct had told her to prepare a lifeline, a small act of self-preservation. She had also been quietly siphoning off small amounts from the household account into a separate bank account under her maiden name, Dorothy Brown. It wasn't much by Rodney's standards, just over $50,000, but to her, right now, it was the keys to a new kingdom. She turned on the burner phone and made her first call. It rang 3 times before a calm, familiar voice answered. "Timothy, it's Dorothy." Timothy Johnson had been her best friend in college. A brilliant, kind-hearted history major who had gone on to become one of Boston's most formidable divorce attorneys. They had lost touch after she married Rodney, a drift that Dorothy now realized Rodney had subtly engineered. "Dory, my God, is everything okay?" he asked, his voice instantly laced with concern. The dam broke. The carefully constructed calm shattered, and she began to sob, the ugly, gasping sounds of a heart breaking. "No, Tim. Nothing is okay. I came home. He was with someone. In our bed." She didn't have to say who. Timothy was silent for a moment, letting her cry. There was no pity in his silence, only a deep, anchoring empathy. "Where are you?" "On the pike. I don't know. I just left." "Okay, Dorothy. Listen to me. Don't go to your parents. Don't go to a friend's house. He'll look there first. Find a non-chain hotel, something small, and pay with cash. Your iPhone is off, right?" "Yes." "Good. He can track it. The CRV has a GPS locator tied to his security service. We need to ditch it. Tomorrow I'm going to wire you money from a client trust account. You'll use that cash to buy a used car, something forgettable. In the meantime, I want you to go to an ATM, 3 different ones, different banks, and pull out as much cash as you can from that account you have. Then lay low. Don't call anyone but me, and only from this phone. Are you with me?" His instructions were a lifeline in the storm. He wasn't just offering sympathy. He was giving her a plan. He was giving her back a sense of agency. "Yes, Tim, I'm with you." "Good girl," he said softly. "You're stronger than you think you are, Dory. He never deserved you." Meanwhile, back in Weston, Rodney Searles was growing impatient. After Tanya had hastily dressed and departed in an Uber, A slight smirk still on her face, Rodney had paced the bedroom. He'd called Dorothy's phone a dozen times, each call going straight to voicemail. He called her mother, who hadn't heard from her. He checked the tracker on her car, which showed her on the highway, heading west. "Damn it," he muttered. This was more than her usual sulk. It was inconvenient. He had a major merger to close next week. He didn't have time for this domestic drama. He poured himself a glass of Macallan 25, the amber liquid doing little to soothe his irritation. He looked around the silent, cavernous house. Dorothy's presence was everywhere, in the fresh flowers on the mantel, the curated art on the walls, the stack of baby-name books on the nightstand. Her absence was a void, and it unnerved him. He believed, with the unshakable arrogance of a man who had never truly faced consequences, that this was a negotiation. She was raising the stakes. She would eventually call, demand apologies, a ridiculously expensive piece of jewelry, a trip to Paris. He would capitulate, she would come home, and things would return to normal. He would just have to be more careful with Tanya in the future. He sent her a text message, confident it would eventually be delivered. "Dory, this is insane. Come home. We need to be adults about this. Think about the baby." He had no idea that the Dorothy he was texting no longer existed. Miles away, in a dingy motel room smelling of stale cigarettes and disinfectant, the Dorothy was methodically erasing herself. She withdrew cash, her face obscured by a hoodie. She used the motel's spotty Wi-Fi on a burner laptop to close all her social media accounts. She was a ghost, a phantom. She lay on the lumpy bed, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. The baby kicked, a gentle reminder of the life that was wholly hers, the one thing Rodney couldn't touch, couldn't control, couldn't devalue. He thought he had taken everything from her. But as she lay there in the anonymous dark, Dorothy Brown realized she had nothing left to lose. And that made her, for the first time in a very long time, powerful. 3 months passed. The fiery chaos of that August afternoon settled into the quiet embers of a cold, determined resolve. Rodney's initial annoyance had morphed into a simmering rage. Dorothy had not come home. She had not called. The text messages and voicemails, first placating, then demanding, then threatening, went unanswered. Her credit cards were unused. Her bank account was untouched after the initial cash withdrawals. She had vanished as completely as smoke. He hired a private investigator, a former cop with a bulldog face and a hefty price tag. The man, named Peterson, found the abandoned CRV in a long-term parking lot at a bus station in Albany, New York. The trail went cold there. Peterson assured Rodney that women like Dorothy always surfaced. "They need money, Mr. Searles. They get lonely. They make a mistake. We'll find her." Rodney's life in the glass house continued, but its flawless surface now showed hairline cracks. Tanya Dykes had moved in, her vibrant, modern possessions clashing with Dorothy's classic, understated taste. She filled the closets with her designer clothes and the bathrooms with her expensive perfumes, but her presence felt like a performance. The light, musical laughter that had once seemed so seductive now grated on Rodney's nerves. She was always on, ambitious, demanding, constantly angling for a more permanent position, for the ring, for the title of the next Mrs. Searles. She was a transaction, and Rodney was beginning to feel he'd made a bad deal. The comfortable, seamless ease Dorothy had provided was gone, replaced by a constant, low-level tension. Far from the brittle opulence of Weston, Dorothy Brown was breathing again. She had driven the used 2012 Toyota Camry she'd bought with cash to Asheville, North Carolina, a city nestled in the misty Blue Ridge Mountains. She rented a small, furnished, 2-bedroom apartment under her maiden name, paid the first 6 months' rent in cash, and introduced herself to her neighbors as Dana. a writer on a quiet retreat. Her life was simple, anonymous, and her own. She spent her days walking the winding mountain trails, the crisp autumn air filling her lungs. She discovered a small, independent bookstore where she'd spend hours reading, a cup of herbal tea growing cold beside her. She joined a prenatal yoga class, not the trendy competitive studio she'd attended in Weston, but a warm, welcoming space filled with women of all shapes and sizes. Here, she wasn't Rodney Searle's wife. She was just Dorothy, a woman about to become a mother. Her second bedroom was slowly transforming into a nursery. She painted the walls a soft, buttery yellow herself, bought a simple wooden crib from a local craftsman, and knitted a small, lopsided blanket. Each object was chosen with love, not for its brand name or its ability to impress. This life was authentic in a way her old one had never been. She spoke to Timothy Johnson once a week from her burner phone. He was her anchor, her strategist. He had quietly filed for a legal separation on grounds of irreconcilable differences, serving Rodney at his office. The move was designed to protect Dorothy's maternal rights and a portion of the marital assets without revealing her location. Rodney had been blindsided. The filing, delivered by a stoic process server in the middle of a board meeting, was a declaration of war. He had his own lawyers, a team of sharks from a top Boston firm, file a response, accusing Dorothy of being emotionally unstable, of kidnapping his unborn child. It was a vicious, calculated attack. "Don't let it get to you," Timothy told her during one of their calls. Dorothy was sitting on her small balcony, watching the sun set behind Mount Pisgah, painting the sky in hues of purple and gold. It's standard procedure for a narcissist with a bottomless war chest. They attack, they smear, they try to control the narrative. But we have the truth on our side, Dory. And more importantly, we have a plan. The plan was patience. Dorothy was to remain hidden, establish residency in North Carolina, and build a stable life for her child. The moment the baby was born, they would amend the filing and sue for full custody and divorce on her terms. But the solitude, while healing, was also a breeding ground for fear. Some nights she would wake up in a cold sweat, the memory of Rodney's fury, a tangible presence in the room. She would imagine him finding her, his expensive car pulling up outside her modest apartment building. The power he wielded, the money, the connections, felt like an insurmountable force. She would place a hand on her belly, feeling the strong, steady movements of her son, and draw strength from him. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for him. One chilly November evening, while she was online researching pediatricians, an unfamiliar name popped up in a local Asheville mums group on social media. Tanya Dykes has joined the group. Dorothy's blood ran cold. It had to be a coincidence. There could be hundreds, thousands of Tanya Dykeses in the world. She clicked on the profile. The picture was of a smiling, glamorous woman holding a glass of champagne on a yacht. The profile listed her location as Boston, MA. But why join a group in Asheville? Then she saw the post, made just an hour earlier. "Hi ladies, my partner and I are thinking of relocating to your beautiful city. He's in finance and can work from anywhere. We're looking for a family-friendly neighborhood with good schools. TIA for any recommendations." It wasn't a coincidence. They knew. Or they were close. The PI must have found something. A digital breadcrumb, a whisper. They were hunting her. The quiet sanctuary she had so carefully built was no longer safe. The storm she had outrun was gathering again, right on her doorstep. The digital intrusion felt like a home invasion. Dorothy stared at Tanya's smiling profile picture, the cheerful emoji at the end of her post a mocking grin. It was a probe, a baited hook cast into the quiet waters of her new life. They weren't in Asheville yet, but they were testing the ground, trying to flush her out. Panic seized her, cold and sharp. Her first instinct was to run again. Pack her bags, get in the car, and drive until the town was a speck in her rearview mirror. She stood up, her hands trembling, and paced the small living room. But where would she go? The world suddenly felt small, and Rodney's reach seemed impossibly long. She clutched her belly, the weight of her son a grounding force. No, she couldn't run forever. Running was what he expected. It was the act of a victim. She had spent the last 3 months building a life, not a hiding place. She would not let them tear it down so easily. She picked up the burner phone and called Timothy. Her voice was tight with fear as she explained what she'd found. "Okay, Dory, stay calm." Timothy's voice was steady, a rock in her sea of anxiety. "This is a tactic. They don't have your address. They probably don't even know for sure that you're in Asheville. Peterson, the PI, probably traced an IP ping or a data point to that geographic area. This is a fishing expedition. They're hoping you'll panic and make a mistake." "What do I do, Tim?" "Nothing," he said firmly. "You do absolutely nothing. You don't engage. You enhance your privacy settings, and you go about your life. But you stay vigilant. Lock your doors. Be aware of your surroundings. They've shown their hand." Now we wait. His confidence was a balm, but a seed of terror had been planted. Every unfamiliar car that drove down her street, every stranger's glance in the grocery store, felt like a threat. The peace she had found in the mountains was gone, replaced by a constant, humming dread. Back in Weston, the decision to probe Asheville had been Rodney's, born of sheer frustration. The PI, Peterson, had hit a dead end after finding the car. But a deep dive into Dorothy's old, deleted browser history had revealed searches from over a year ago for best small cities for artists and mountain town retreats. Asheville had been on the list. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead they had. "So you want me to just have your girlfriend join a mummy group?" Peterson had asked, his tone skeptical. "Mr. Surlees, that's not exactly standard procedure." "Just do it," Rodney had snapped. "Dorothy is predictable. She'll be looking for a community. She'll be nesting. If she's there, she'll see it. It might spook her into making a move." Tanya had been thrilled with the assignment. It made her feel like a partner in Rodney's quest, not just a live-in girlfriend. "Don't worry, Rod," she'd said, curling up next to him on the sofa that Dorothy had chosen. "We'll find her. And then you can finally put this all behind you, and we can move on with our life." But their life was unraveling. The novelty had worn off. Tanya's ambition, which had once seemed exciting, was now exhausting. She constantly talked about the future, marriage, a ring, their own children. She was trying to fit into Dorothy's life, but the fit was all wrong. One evening, during a tense dinner, Rodney, distracted by a business call, had unthinkingly said, "Could you pass the salt, Dory?" The silence that followed was deafening. Tanya's fork clattered onto her plate. "What did you just call me?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "It was a slip of the tongue, Tanya. For God's sake." "It's been months, Rodney. She's gone. Why is she still living in your head?" Tanya stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "I'm not her replacement. I'm not a placeholder you keep around while you obsess over your runaway pregnant wife. You need to choose. It's her or it's me." The ultimatum hung in the air. For a fleeting moment, Rodney felt an overwhelming sense of exhaustion. He was tired of Tanya, tired of the lawyers, tired of the search for Dorothy. He just wanted his quiet, orderly life back. He realized with a startling and unpleasant jolt that the peace he craved wasn't just an absence of conflict. It was the specific absence of conflict that Dorothy had so expertly managed for him. He hadn't just lost a wife. He'd lost his anchor. Weeks later, in the sterile, quiet environment of an Asheville hospital room, Dorothy's world shifted on its axis. After 12 hours of grueling labor, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Ethan. Ethan Brown. Holding him for the first time, his tiny, wrinkled body warm against her chest, Dorothy felt a love so fierce and protective it eclipsed every other emotion. The fear, the anger, the betrayal, it all faded into the background. Looking into her son's deep blue eyes, she knew she wasn't a victim anymore. She was a mother, a warrior. The moment she was discharged from the hospital, she called Timothy. "He's here, Tim," she said, her voice thick with emotion as she gazed at Ethan sleeping in his car seat. "He's perfect. Congratulations, Dory," he said, and she could hear the genuine joy in his voice. "I'm so happy for you. Are you ready?" "Yes," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound strength. "Let's do it. Let's end this." The very next day, a process server walked into Rodney Searles' gleaming Boston office for the second time. He handed a stunned Rodney a new set of documents. They were not a response. They were an offensive, a petition for divorce on the grounds of adultery, a request for an emergency hearing to establish paternity, and sole legal and physical custody for Dorothy. Attached was a copy of Ethan Brown's birth certificate and a restraining order application, citing Rodney's increasingly aggressive behavior and use of a private investigator as harassment. Rodney stared at the papers, his face turning a dark, mottled red. The name Ethan Brown leaped off the page. Brown. She hadn't given him his name. She had erased him completely. This wasn't the frightened, emotional woman who had run out into the rain. This was a calculated strategic assault. She wasn't hiding in a corner, waiting to be found. She was on the attack. The power imbalance he had relied on his entire life had just been turned on its head. And for the first time, Rodney Searles felt a sliver of genuine fear. The legal documents landed on Rodney's antique mahogany desk like a declaration of war. His initial shock quickly hardened into a cold, seething fury. Sole custody, restraining order, harassment. The audacity was breathtaking. He had spent a fortune on the best legal team in Boston, and they had been outmaneuvered by Timothy Johnson, a man he vaguely remembered from Dorothy's college photos as a soft, intellectual type. "This is an ambush," he snarled into the phone at his lead attorney, a slick corporate lawyer named Marcus Thorne. "How did they get the jump on us like this? I'm paying you $700 an hour to be proactive." "They were patient, Rodney," Marcus said, his voice a calm counterpoint to Rodney's rage. "They waited until the child was born in North Carolina, establishing jurisdiction there. It's a smart move. It forces you to fight on their turf. And this adultery claim, do you have any exposure there?" Rodney thought of Tanya, who was at that very moment directing painters in what used to be Dorothy's home office, turning it into a garish pink dressing room. "It's a he said, she said situation," he lied, the words tasting like ash. "I hope so," Marcus said dryly, "because if they have proof, this custody battle gets exponentially harder for you. The judge won't look kindly on it." The battle lines were drawn. Rodney's legal strategy was to paint Dorothy as an unstable, vindictive woman who had fled her marriage in a fit of hormonal rage and maliciously kept a father from his child. They filed motions demanding a psychological evaluation for Dorothy and immediate DNA testing to establish paternity, framing it as a necessary step due to her erratic behavior. In Asheville, Dorothy read the filings with a knot of ice in her stomach. The words were a vile caricature of the truth, twisting her desperate act of self-preservation into a portrait of mental illness. "This is what they do," Timothy reassured her over the phone. He had flown down to meet with her and her new local counsel, a sharp, empathetic family lawyer named Sarah. "They throw mud, hoping some of it will stick, but we have something they don't. The truth. And we have proof." The proof was a simple, devastating thing. The day Dorothy had left, after Rodney had gone downstairs to see Tanya out, Dorothy had instinctively gone back upstairs. In a daze, she had seen Rodney's laptop open on his desk. On the screen was his calendar. Open to that day was an appointment. 2 p.m., Tanya. But it wasn't the appointment itself that was damning. It was the fact that it was a recurring weekly appointment, stretching back 6 months. With a trembling hand, she had taken her old iPhone, the one she would later abandon, and taken a clear, time-stamped photograph of the screen. It wasn't just a one-time mistake, as he'd claimed. It was a long-term, calculated affair. "We hold on to this for now," Timothy advised. "We don't play our best card at the beginning of the game. Let him build his fortress of lies. We'll knock it down when it matters most." The preliminary hearing was scheduled to take place via video conference, a cold and impersonal forum for such a deeply personal war. Dorothy sat at the polished table in Sarah's office, Ethan sleeping peacefully in a carrier at her feet. She wore a simple navy blue dress, her hair pulled back neatly. She looked composed, a stark contrast to the unhinged woman described in Rodney's legal filings. On the large screen, she saw him for the first time in nearly a year. He looked thinner, his face etched with lines of stress and anger. He sat in a high-tech conference room, flanked by Marcus Thorne and 2 junior associates. He refused to look at her, his gaze fixed stonily on the judge's image at the top of the screen. The hearing was a brutal, clinical dissection of her life. Rodney's lawyer painted her as a flighty, emotional housewife who had abandoned a loving, supportive husband. They presented her disappearance as proof of her instability. When it was Sarah's turn, she spoke with a calm, methodical precision. "Your Honor, my client, Ms. Brown, did not abandon her marriage. She fled a toxic and unsafe environment for herself and her unborn child. She left her home on August 28th of last year after discovering her husband, Mr. Searles, in the marital bed with his subordinate, Ms. Tanya Dykes." Rodney flinched on screen, a barely perceptible tightening of his jaw. Marcus Thorne immediately objected. "Objection, Your Honor. These are unsubstantiated and inflammatory allegations." "On the contrary, Your Honor," Sarah continued smoothly, "we have evidence that Mr. Searles was engaged in a long-term affair with Ms. Dykes, evidence we are prepared to present at trial. My client left to protect her child from the emotional distress of a volatile situation created entirely by Mr. Searles." The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, peered over her glasses. "Mr. Searles, is it true that Ms. Dykes is currently residing with you in the marital home?" Rodney hesitated. Marcus whispered something in his ear. "Yes, Your Honor," Rodney said through gritted teeth. "She is a colleague who was in a difficult housing situation. I was offering her support. The lie was so pathetic, so transparent, that Dorothy almost felt a flicker of pity for him. He was a king with no clothes." The judge's expression was unreadable. "The court orders a DNA test to confirm paternity immediately. A guardian ad litem will be appointed to represent the interests of the child, Ethan Brown. Ms. Brown will retain temporary sole physical custody. Mr. Searles, given the circumstances and the distance, you are granted 2 hours of supervised virtual visitation per week. We will reconvene in 90 days to review the findings." It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. They hadn't fallen for his lies. As the video conference ended, Rodney's image lingered on the screen for a moment before blinking out. For the first time, His mask of controlled fury had slipped, replaced by a look of pure, undiluted shock. He had used his power and money to bully and control everyone in his life. He had just discovered they were useless against the simple, unassailable weapon of the truth. Tanya was waiting for him when he got home. "Well, what happened?" "She has temporary custody," he spat, throwing his briefcase onto a chair. "I have to see my son. My son, on a damn webcam with a court-appointed babysitter." "They can't do that," Tanya said, her voice rising. "You're his father. You have rights." "My rights," Rodney said with a bitter laugh, "are currently being dictated by the fact that the judge knows you're living here. My lawyer thinks your presence is complicating the narrative." The implication was clear. She wasn't an asset anymore. She was a liability. The triumphant victor who had watched Dorothy leave in the rain was now just another problem for Rodney Searles to manage. The foundation of her new life, built on the ruins of Dorothy's, was beginning to feel terrifyingly unstable. The 90 days leading up to the next hearing were a brutal war of attrition. Rodney's legal team inundated Timothy and Sarah with discovery requests, subpoenas, and depositions, a strategy designed to bleed Dorothy dry, emotionally and financially. They subpoenaed her college transcripts, her old employment records, even the prenatal yoga instructor in Asheville, looking for any scrap of information they could twist into a sign of instability. But Timothy had prepared her for this. Dorothy's life was an open book, and it was a book filled with quiet competence and stability. She had a master's degree in art history. Her old boss at the museum provided a glowing reference. Her neighbors in Asheville described her as a kind, devoted mother. The mud Rodney slung refused to stick. Meanwhile, the court-appointed guardian ad litem, a thoughtful and experienced social worker named Mrs. Gable, conducted her investigation. She interviewed Dorothy at length in her small, sunny apartment, observing her gentle, attentive interactions with Ethan. The home was modest but clean, safe, and filled with love. Her video conference with Rodney was a different story. He tried to charm her, presenting himself as a heartbroken father, desperate to be a part of his son's life. But Mrs. Gable was trained to see past such performances. She noted his repeated attempts to steer the conversation toward Dorothy's faults, his dismissive language when talking about the affair, a momentary lapse in judgment, and his visible frustration when discussing the supervised virtual visits. Those visits were an agony for everyone involved. Ethan, just a few months old, would often cry or sleep through them, while Rodney sat stiffly in his office, trying to engage with a baby on a screen. "Look, Ethan, it's Daddy," he'd say, his voice hollow. Dorothy had to remain present but out of frame, her heart aching for her son, who deserved better than this sterile, court-ordered parody of a father-son relationship. Back in Weston, Rodney's world was shrinking. The legal bills were astronomical, even for him. But more damaging was the slow leak of information about his messy divorce into his professional circle. Whispers followed him at the country club and in the boardroom. A man who couldn't control his own house, his own wife, was perhaps not as infallible as he seemed. A major investor pulled out of a new fund he was launching, citing concerns about instability in senior leadership. Tanya, feeling the walls close in, grew more desperate. "You have to do something, Rod," she'd insist. "You have to fight harder. Why are you letting her win?" He saw her then for what she was. Not a partner, but an echo of his own worst impulses. Greedy, entitled, and transactional. She wasn't a comfort. She was a constant, nagging reminder of the single stupidest mistake of his life. The breaking point came a week before the final hearing. Timothy called Dorothy. "It's time," he said. "We need a keystone, something to make their entire case crumble." Dorothy knew what he meant. For years, as the manager of the Searles household, she had been responsible for organizing all their financial documents for their accountant. She was meticulous, keeping digital and physical copies of everything. One year, she had noticed a strange recurring wire transfer of $100,000 every quarter to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands called Searles Strategic Holdings. When she'd asked Rodney about it, he'd been uncharacteristically vague and angry. "It's complex investment stuff, Dory. You wouldn't understand. Don't worry about it." Sensing his agitation, she hadn't pushed. But she had made a copy of the statements, filing them away with a vague sense of unease. She had given that file to Timothy months ago. His forensic accountants had been quietly digging ever since. Rodney has been systematically hiding marital assets in that offshore account for the last 5 years, Timothy explained. It's a classic case of financial fraud against a spouse. But it's worse than that. The source of the funds is questionable. It seems to be linked to an insider trading investigation the SEC has been sniffing around for the past year. If this information were to be shared with, say, the U.S. Attorney's Office, he let the implication hang in the air. This was the keystone. This wasn't just about adultery or custody anymore. This was about Rodney's freedom. Timothy Johnson requested a settlement conference with Rodney and his lawyer. They met in a neutral conference room in Charlotte. Dorothy was not present. Timothy would be her sword and shield. Timothy laid it out. Not with malice, but with cold, hard facts. He presented the photograph of the calendar, proving the long-term nature of the affair. He presented the glowing report from the Guardian ad litem. And then he slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was a bank statement from Searles Strategic Holdings. Rodney's face went pale. Marcus Thorne looked at the statement, then at his client, his eyes narrowing. "Here is our settlement offer," Timothy said calmly. "Dorothy gets sole legal and physical custody of Ethan. Rodney gets supervised visitation in Asheville 4 times a year at his own expense. He will pay a substantial, fixed amount in child support until Ethan is 21. In addition, Dorothy will receive 50% of all declared marital assets. In exchange for her signature on this agreement, that file," he tapped the bank statement, "remains a private matter between us." It was checkmate. Marcus Thorne looked at Rodney, whose arrogant facade had completely crumbled. He was a cornered animal. "Take the deal, Rodney," the lawyer advised in a low voice. Rodney left the conference room a broken man. He drove back to Weston in a daze. When he walked through the front door, Tanya was there, a glass of wine in her hand. "How did it go?" she asked, a hopeful lilt in her voice. "It's over," he said, his voice flat. "She won. She won everything." He slumped onto a sofa, the fight gone out of him. He looked at Tanya, at the pink dressing room down the hall, at the life he had chosen. It was all a cheap imitation, a hollow prize. Tanya stared at him, at his defeat. She had hitched her wagon to a star, and the star was falling from the sky. There would be no ring, no Mrs. Searles title, no access to the limitless funds she had dreamed of. He was damaged goods. Without a word, she turned and walked upstairs. An hour later, she came down with 2 suitcases. She didn't look at him as she walked to the door. "Where will you go?" he asked, the question devoid of emotion. "Don't worry about me," she said, her voice hard. "I always land on my feet." She walked out the door, leaving him alone in the vast, silent glass house, a king in a kingdom of one. The laughter was finally gone. The divorce was finalized on a crisp, clear day in early spring. The paperwork, signed and sealed, felt less like an ending and more like a quiet, formal beginning. Dorothy sat in Sarah's office, the pen feeling light in her hand. There was no triumph, no desire for revenge, only a profound sense of peace. She had not destroyed Rodney. His own choices had done that. She had simply refused to be a casualty of his wreckage. The settlement was more than generous. It wasn't about the money itself, but what it represented: security, independence, and the freedom to give Ethan the life he deserved. A life built on a foundation of honesty and love, not glass and lies. A few weeks later, Rodney came for his first supervised visit. The meeting was at a neutral location, a bright, cheerful family center in Asheville. When Dorothy walked in, holding Ethan, she saw Rodney waiting with the court-appointed supervisor. He looked diminished. The bespoke suit hung a little looser on his frame. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a hesitant uncertainty. He looked at Ethan, who was now nearly a year old, a happy, gurgling baby with a shock of dark hair like his father's, and Dorothy's calm blue eyes. Rodney's face, for the first time, showed a flicker of something beyond anger or self-pity. It was a raw, aching regret. He's beautiful, Dory," he stammered, his voice thick. "His name is Dorothy," she corrected him, gently but firmly. She handed Ethan over. Rodney held his son with an awkwardness that broke her heart a little. He had missed it all: the first smile, the first laugh, the sleepless nights, the tiny miraculous moments that forge the unbreakable bond between a parent and child. He was a stranger to his own son. She watched for a few minutes as he tried to play with Ethan, the supervisor looking on with a practiced, neutral expression. She saw the ghost of the man she had once loved, and the man he had become. He was no longer a monster in her mind, just a sad, flawed man who had broken the most precious things in his life. She walked over to him before she left. "I hope you can be a good father to him, Rodney. He deserves that." He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a galaxy of unspoken things, apologies, questions, regrets. "I know," he whispered. "I'm sorry, Dorothy, for everything." The apology, when it finally came, felt distant, like a message in a bottle that had washed ashore long after the ship had sailed. She didn't need it anymore. "Goodbye, Rodney," she said, and walked out into the sunshine, feeling nothing but light. Her redemption wasn't in his downfall, but in her own rise. She bought a small house with a wide porch and a view of the mountains. She started a small online art consultancy business, helping clients build their own collections. Her old passion, so long dormant, bloomed anew. Her life was filled with the quiet joys she had once craved. Ethan's laughter echoing through the house, the smell of paint and old books, the steady, comforting presence of good friends from her yoga class, the breathtaking beauty of a mountain sunset. She had walked out of the glass house with nothing but the clothes on her back and the child in her womb. She had been stripped of her name, her home, her security, but in losing everything, she had found herself. She was not Mrs. Dorothy Searles, the millionaire's wife. She was Dorothy Brown, a mother, a businesswoman, a survivor. She had faced the storm and walked out the other side, not just intact, but stronger, truer, and finally, breathtakingly free. Dorothy's story is a powerful reminder that the end of one chapter is often the beginning of a truly authentic life. She lost a marriage built on lies, but found a strength she never knew she possessed. Her journey from a shattered wife to a resilient, independent mother shows that our greatest trials can forge our greatest triumphs. It's a testament to the fact that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in peace, self-respect, and the courage to build a future on your own terms. What did you think of Dorothy's incredible transformation? Could you have found the strength to do what she did? Let us know in the comments below. Her story is one of betrayal, but ultimately of profound redemption and the quiet victory of a life well lived. If you were moved by her journey, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe for more true-to-life stories that touch the heart. Thank you for watching.